Welcome back. So this series, we're just going to scratch the surface. I'm going to show you what it is that you need to learn, but I'm only going to scratch the surface. Then I'm going to touch on the things that you need to know. So the stuff that's extra is pretty much just going to be the beacons. You can play around with the beacons, but really what we want to be able to do is to get you understanding directions for when you're taking off and landing. So that's the most important part in this exercise. So we'll cover all the other things that go with it just so you understand what's going on, give you some extra stuff that you can look up, but really runways and airways, I guess, is what we're going to give you today. So in DCS we have nav aids. You can see them on the map. If you hit F10 you'll see little icons for radio stations, Tekken stations. Tekken looks like a little three-pointed thing. And then you've got some other beacons which are pretty much just a dot with some other dots coming off of them. You'll know them when you see them. These are all modelled in DCS. They have their own frequencies, so you can tune into them and use them. So an ADF beacon or a DME or whatever you want to call it, they're different, but it's just a basic little radio station that transmits a signal. Now the radio interference and stuff is actually modelled in DCS, which is pretty cool. So if you're not straight and level, or you're at a weird attitude towards the beacon, it won't be accurate. So you need to be straight and level to pick it up properly. That's one really cool thing with DCS. Like if you've got someone radioing in 120 miles away and you're behind a mountain, it doesn't come through clear, which is really, really cool. But it also affects the radio signals. So if you're not straight and level, you're going to get a little bit of weird interference. You might be in a roll, something like that, and it'll say that the beacon's right in front of you when in actual fact it's to your left, because you're in that roll and you're not picking up the signal with your antenna correctly. That does happen, so don't be disheartened. It does work, but your attitude of the aircraft will affect how your instruments pick up these radio signals. Now we'll just jump over Tekken for a minute and talk about VOR. So VOR is basically a radio signal like an ADF, but it's got an extra like phase shifting frequency in there, which we won't go into the science or anything like I said. But what it does is it gives you directional info off of the beacon. So say for instance you want to use it like a highway. You know that from this particular beacon, if you go 45 degrees from that beacon on bearing 45, you'll end up where you need to be in however many minutes or however long. So what you can do is you can tune into that beacon, go over the beacon, turn 45 and use it like a highway, and that way you'll also get minimal slip because of wind or anything like that. So that can come in handy. I myself just kind of use the GPS. I've used VOR in the past, VOR, sorry, when I say VOR I get told off, so I have to go to VOR. Used it in the past to play around with. Yes, it does exist in DCS. Yes, it does work. Tekken is basically VOR on roids, because it'll tell you how far away from the beacon you are. This comes in handy when you want to land on an aircraft carrier or when you're doing air-to-air refueling. So the beacon will give you distance information from the beacon. Hopefully that beacon is attached to an aircraft carrier or air-to-air refueling, but you'll be able to pick it on your instruments. It'll say you're 10 miles out or whatever, or give you the Tekken picture. Say for instance you're in the F-18, you can tune into Tekken. With the aircraft carrier you'll see a little Tekken symbol, and then from there you know where the aircraft carrier is because the beacon is on there. So you can use those to get yourself around. Usually GPS and stuff like that is most used, but this does exist. Say for instance you're in enemy territory, you want to do it properly, you get a few rounds in the bottom and your instruments stop working apart from your HSI, which I've got a little picture of the HSI there. That's basically giving you your bearings. So you've got that to work with. You can kind of find your way back home if you know what you're doing. So when it comes to airfields work on bearings as well. So as you can see, this perfect picture I've drawn of a runway. If you want to take off to the left on that runway, say north is up, then runway 27 is the runway you want to take. Now, they cut off the last digit, and runways are as close to magnetic as you can kind of get, but they're not always perfect. So if you want to do like a real professional landing, you might want to look at the knee board and actually check to see what bearing the runway actually is, because runway 27 might actually be anywhere between 271 to 275. So if you want to use your instruments and land, blind, you can do that, but you need to be aware of the actual bearing of the runway. So if you want to land from the left going right, so if you want to go east, if you want to land east, that is runway 9. So, or runway 09, which actually means 90. So we always cut off the last digit. Runway 13 is 130. So that's basically what you need in order to take off and land and understand the direction. So bearings do come into this, but that will explain the runway numbers for you and how it works. So that's your bit that you have to know. Let's move on to the extra stuff. So, say for instance you're this little aircraft down on the bottom right. You're travelling 0 or 360, you're headed basically magnetic north. Yes, there is a little bit of drift in the instruments, so it's not perfect, but you can go into that a bit further. If you want to perfect it, go right ahead, that's up to you. But you can be a little bit off on your bearings. Now, say for instance he wants to hit that runway. That runway for him is bearing 0. Now if we look at these aircraft on the right, the bearing to that's probably, I don't know, what, 4660 or something like that. So bearings don't always work in relation to other aircraft. Your 12 o'clock is not someone else's 12 o'clock, depending on where they are from you. So what we do is we use bearings. In some cases you'll have a bullseye. The bullseye will be a landmark or a waypoint that someone has given the title of bullseye, and you will use distance and bearing information from that location. If you get a radio call that says BRA, that's bearing, range, altitude and attitude, those calls are actually made specific to your aircraft. So if you're going north and you pick up some guys at 270 and they're actually at 270 from you, BRA calls will be for your aircraft. They will say something like BRA 2 ship, whatever, 270 for 50, 50 miles away at 270. So you can look at your HSI and see which direction you're in, and you can go 270 and you'll eventually catch up to them or meet them head on or anything like that. But if you're discussing bearings with someone else at a specific point, say for instance an airfield that you're bombing or something is just to your right, and you say, hey, I've got this airfield, I'm 1 mile away from it, bearing 90, your other mate's not going to know. That 90 means nothing to him. So what we do is we use a bullseye, and you'll say, it's at 179 for whatever, that kind of thing. That takes a lot of practice, but just remember there's your aircraft and there's other aircraft. So what in relation to you might not be in relation to anyone else. So when you're actually calling out at certain positions, that's going to be meaningless, because the guy who's 100 miles to your left, if he turns left as well, he's actually going further away from where you want to go, that kind of thing. So you need to be aware what kinds of calls you're making, whether it needs to be on the bullseye, whether it's in relation to you, that kind of thing. So when it comes to navigation as well, because you're moving and things move on the ground, because you're moving over it. What a silly thing to say. Wind can also push you off the track. So this little guy on the left here that I've got, he needs to go 003 in order to get to where he needs to be. Now, over a period of time, wind's going to blow him off, and he's going to end up being off course. Now, there is a thing called 1 in 60 rule, if you're interested, which is how to work out things where, you know, how far off you've moved 1 mile, you know, what course correction, how many degrees do you need to take. You can learn that. It's pretty cool. It does come in handy. So it's the 1 in 60 rule. But say, for instance, this gentleman on the left here needs to go at 003 in order to get to where he needs to be. He flies for, I don't know, 20 minutes, but the wind has blown him off course. His course correction needs to be more drastic. He can't keep going 003 in order to get to where he's going. Things move around. So his actual course was 358 or something like that. The distance where he's travelled, his new course correction needs to be 45 degrees in order to get to it. Now, what I recommend when you're first starting out, in order to kind of get this working for you, have the F10 map open occasionally. Have a look at where you're drifting, where you are. Work out your directions. You can use that ruler that I showed you when you're in the mission editor. Use the ruler, find out which direction you're in. You will actually be surprised how far off course you will go in the span of about 10 minutes. So you just need to be aware that things do move around. You know, what once was at 45, not long after, especially travelling at the speeds in supersonic aircraft, is now, you know, 90 or 100 degrees, like at bearing 100, because you've gone so fast. You've even roll will affect it, that kind of thing. So that's it for now. I've tried to cover off as basic as I can, but just remember the landing is what we want. So this video has pretty much explained the runways. So the, you know, 27, runway 90, or actually 09. Always cut off the last digit. Runways aren't always exactly what they say they are, so check the knee board so you can see 27 is actually 271 or 273. So if you want to do a blind landing, you can work it out accurately with your instruments and figure out where you're going. There is a little bit of drift in there. It's not always perfect when it comes to your HSI, your horizontal situation indicator. It doesn't give you exact bearings. Things are off a little bit. Things are moving on the ground, so bearings do change. Your relationship to the particular point does matter. Those bearings will change with time because you're moving, you're turning, you're rolling. When you're making calls, just be aware that, is this call going to be accurate for someone else? Is your 6 o'clock their 6 o'clock? Is 325 their 325? Or is it a call from a bullseye, you know, from a particular landmark south 300 meters? So thanks for watching. Hopefully I've helped you, and see you next time.